friends of Baylor. Who knew that the IOC was following us? I didn't think they were that interested in our little broadcast, but apparently they are, and they're not real happy about it. So we're now officially a menace to the game. We're now going to call those sporting events that are taking place in China, we're going to call them the Winter Games. And of course, we're not going to use our 5 linked ring viruses anymore as our logo, but we have a new one. 4 viruses in a bobsled. So I can't wait to show you our new stuff. And hopefully this will be okay with the IOC. God love them. They have nothing better to do than to watch my podcast. Anyway, this is what's going on in the world, and it's really interesting because I'm really enjoying the politics of COVID. So look how the world is. I mean, there's hot spots all over the place, and then there's continents, Africa and part of China, that are actually quite low. And if you look at the peak of the world cases coming down, it's still way higher than any previous time. Yet, what are countries doing? Racing to be the new Boris Johnson. We want to be the first to declare inappropriately that the pandemic is over. So what countries are doing that? Denmark has decided we're going to completely open up. Sweden has joined most of the European nations in saying at the end of February we're going to open back up. And of course, our own Connecticut and New Jersey have decided we don't need mask mandates. Meanwhile, what's going on with the virus, because nobody pays attention to that, just what they want to do. CDC just came out with a great study showing that masks actually help prevent transmission in schools. So why not just throw away the mask mandates in Connecticut and New Jersey? I mean, sometimes you wonder what these people are thinking. Also, by the way, the CDC showed that people who do wear masks are less likely to test positive. Another reason to get rid of masks before the pandemic is over. So I was thinking about, well, what good things happened from a lockdown? Great study about to hopefully come out in Science. It was a wonderful study showing that when you're in a lockdown, people use less aerosols. So you know what that does? Less lightning. We've had a lot less lightning this year, all as a result of lockdown. So if you're looking for something positive to say about lockdowns, less lightning. So here's what's going on in the United States. It's really hard to show the differences because I showed January 28th and February 11th. You can see really on fire and just slightly less on fire, but still a lot. And we're still at a level that's higher than any of the previous peaks. So I think it's a little early to be declaring victory. If we could only have a little bit of patience, I think 2-3 weeks from now we'll be in good shape, but people are like sort of jumping the gun. In Houston, we're actually coming down. We were the first to go up, so we should be the first to go down. And our poor friends in Dimmitt County, can they not get a break? They just can't get a break. They're back up again. I'm still going to Dimmitt County, my favorite place on earth. Now, in the Texas Medical Center, we're doing really pretty well. We're down to 3,800 cases last week. And by the way, this is finally below the previous peak, so we're making some progress. And on hospitalizations, we're down to 300 hospitalizations a day on average. Again, this is below the previous peaks. So we're actually really close to being where I'm going to start feeling comfortable. And we might be able to get rid of mask mandates and masking, but I think it's going to be another 2-3 weeks. If people could just be patient for 2 weeks, I think we'll get there. A lot of really interesting science this past week, including understanding the symptomatic disease. So this is a great study. We really know very little about the dynamics of the virus and symptoms early on. This was a study out of the Imperial College in London, actually what's called a viral challenge study. So they take 36 healthy male and female volunteers between the age of 18 and 30, and they actually infected them with COVID-19. These were volunteers, and this is very important in trying to understand viral dynamics. They followed them for 2 weeks. They were swabbed in the nose and throat twice a day. PCR was done, and then this is really important. They did viral cultures, so we can actually see what was viable if the virus was still growing. The virus they used was not the virus that was originally isolated from Wuhan, but the very first mutation, the D614G mutation that became the dominant strain in China and then infected most of Europe. And the D614G mutation is in almost all of the variants. And that's the one that really started to be more and more infectious. And as I said, they did PCR and cultures, and just to be sure everything was okay, they did a chest CT on day 5 and 10. So what were the results? Really interesting. 50% of the volunteers became infected. And of the 18, 16 developed mild to moderate symptoms, stuffy, runny nose, sneezes, sore throat. Some experienced headaches, some experienced some joint aches and tiredness and fever. None developed really serious symptoms, and 13 developed loss of smell, which returned by day 90. All the CTs were normal, and all participants were followed for 12 months to make sure they were okay. Now this is what we really haven't had the information before. The average time to first exposure to detect the virus and then in early symptoms was not 5 days like we thought in the previous variants, but 42 hours, less than 2 days. So much shorter than what we've been assuming, which is 5 to 6 days. If you look at the viral levels, how much virus was actually produced, it peaked at about 5 days. It was still detected at 9 days and up to 12 days in some of the volunteers, suggesting that really that 10-day isolation period was really right. If you look at peak viruses, they were really obtained in the nose versus the throat. Again, when you see people wearing a mask that doesn't cover their nose, most of the virus is in the nose, which is why you should wear a mask that covers your nose and mouth. The other interesting thing was they did the antigen capture test, what's called a lateral flow test. Those are the antigen capture tests that we use routinely. They were negative very early and negative late, but in the middle of it, if you followed people serially, they all were detected using lateral flow tests. So that was actually very good. And neutralizing antibodies developed at 14 days, which is what we'd normally expect. Now, obviously, with the new mutants and the new variants, they're more infectious. They might be a little bit different. There might be different viral loads. But in terms of the viral dynamic, this is really the only study that has really showed what the dynamics are. And by the way, they were able to capture virus late at 5 and 6 days. But if you're antigen negative, the antigen capture test negative, did correlate with the loss of viable viruses. So that is a really good test if you use it correctly. So a really good study. Another really interesting study, which was published in Genetics, was a group looked at 70,000 individuals that they got from 23andMe through surveys, and they wanted to find out how many were infected and how many lost the sense of taste and smell. And they did what's called a genome-wide association study looking for single nucleotide polymorphisms, or SNPs. And what you can see is, this is called a Manhattan plot. Each one of these numbers is a chromosome, and you can see where the SNPs were for people who lost taste and smell. And it was in the vicinity, this locus was in the vicinity of genes UGT2A1 and 2. And those genes are expressed in non-neuronal cells in the olfactory epithelium, and they seem to be involved in metabolism of odor molecules. So they're not actually neural cells, but cells around them that metabolize odorants. So very, very interesting study. Now it's been a big week for science. Another really interesting study looked at vaccine efficacy for symptomatic infection, not for serious disease, but just symptomatic. It's a little complicated, but they wanted to compare three vaccines to 2. And anything less than 1, this red line less than 1, shows efficacy. And the first thing was 3 doses really protects you from Delta for being symptomatic. And also for Omicron, you can see. Not as well, not nearly as well. And the protection lasts for Omicron up to about 6 or 7 months, whether it's Pfizer or Moderna. So that third dose does seem to protect against symptomatic infection. But serious infection, I've shown this before, but it's very effective. 2 doses and 3 doses pretty much, reduced by 13-fold and 100-fold the chances of dying. So that's why you should get vaccinated, but it also is very important for symptomatic vaccinations. Now, if you start looking at in the countries around the world, who's getting close to that 90% vaccination rate that really will provide herd immunity? Not many. Singapore, China, Australia's gotten up to 85%, Japan's at 80%, the United States is still between 60 and 70%. And if you look at the world map for who's vaccinated versus who's not, dark green is good, light is not good. There's too many parts of the world that still are so unvaccinated that virus is going to be around, and that's where variants will be made. So even if we're feeling more comfortable in our country, variants are being made in those parts of the world where there's low vaccinations and a lot of infection. And if you look at in the United States, how are we doing on boosters? We're falling behind the rest of the world. See, boosters, we should be 3 is dark blue. Most of the country really remains just with 2 vaccines and not with the booster. Some news on children this week. Pfizer is looking at between 6 months and 12 years of age. They enrolled 8,300 children between 6 and 12, and this is a study that's in the United States, Finland, Poland, and Spain. And the idea was to look at efficacy, tolerability, and immunogenicity of the Pfizer vaccine. They did 2 doses, approximately 21 days apart, in 3 groups: 6 months to 2 years of age, 2 to 5, and 5 to 12. And children between 5 and 12 got 10 micrograms each in their doses. Children under the age of 5 got 3 micrograms, and this is really kind of interesting. It was very effective between 6 months and 2, and over the age of 5. Between 2 and 5, it did not meet criteria for really being as effective as it should. That's probably a dose effect. And so what Pfizer has done is initiated a rolling submission for emergency use. In other words, as they enroll more and more patients between the ages of 2 and 5 at a higher dose, if it becomes effective, which I think it will be at a higher dose, they'll get approval. Got a lot of questions. We've talked about the immunoglobulin response by intramuscular injection. What we really need is a big IgA response, which is the immunoglobulins in the nasal mucosa, to prevent just the infection. There's finally a study going on a nasal spray vaccine. It's being done in India, but it's interesting because I think a nasal spray vaccine will be very useful in developing the IgA response, which might be better at preventing symptomatic infection or any infection at all. Another great study came out looking at the ACE2 receptor. Remember, the spike protein binds the ACE2 receptor. Well, this company is making a little mimic molecule of the ACE2 receptor that will bind on top of the virus spike proteins and make it non-infectious. So a real interesting study. It worked in animal models. We'll see if it becomes a therapy that can be used in people. And now for my favorite time, the Winter Games report. I can't say, what it really is. Well, guess what? People are getting infected, whether they're in the red, that's the loop, the Olympic closed loop, and in gray is people entering the country, and the medal count and COVID counts. So if you look at total medals and COVID athletes positive, I think we're in the lead. So we have 5 medals and 5 COVID athletes positive, so we're at 10. Canada has got 5 athletes positive, but 1 medal ahead of us. The rest of the countries are down to 3 athletes positive, but we're leading with 5. Canada close behind. So I want to end today with some shout-outs. First of all, giant shout-out to Stella. She was vaccinated in France after approval for the 5 to 12-year-olds. I want to thank Alexis, her mom, who got her signed up, and there's a great picture of Stella getting her vaccine. Also, I want a big, giant shout-out and congratulations to Catherine King and Monica Gramages. They were elected to a very prestigious American Society for Clinical Investigation. Great physician scientists. Giant shout out to Life Gift for their efforts in ensuring that organ donations can continue during the pandemic. So early on in the pandemic, COVID positive, weren't accepted for organ donation. They were able to change it. So congratulations to them. And for all of you who are watching the big game this weekend, we have a video afterwards that shows you how to get your game face on. Very exciting. You got to get ready for the game. And then finally, happy Valentine's to everybody. It's one of Lily's favorite days, and she got a new dress for it. And she's really excited for both the Super Bowl as well as Valentine's Day. So have a great weekend. I can't wait to see you next week.
Be ready for anything that comes your way this season. It's time to get your game face on. Let's meet our starting lineup. First up is the N95. If you need this one, you'll know it. Next, let's check out the KN95. You can typically expect great protection from this player. Don't forget about surgical mask. Coverage is key here, people. And finally, let's talk about cloth mask. Double layered protection, tightly woven defense, that's what we're looking for. Got it? Okay. Now, let's look at what will get you a penalty out there. These are our face mask fouls. Mask with ventilation valves or holes. That's illegal use. Ill-fitting mask. Really dropping the ball there. Wearing a dirty or broken mask. That's a 5-yard penalty. Last but not least, wearing a mask incorrectly. That might get you kicked out of the league. There's an opportunity for an extra point though. Double masking. That's a good route. We know it's a tough game out there. If you need the playbook, here's where to find it. Okay, you ready? Break.